The obsidian gavel struck the resonator plate, sending a low, mournful thrum through the vast, vaulted expanse of the High Synod. It was not a sound of order, but of finality, a vibration that rattled the fluid-filled respiratory sacs of the Authari representatives and caused the crystalline carapaces of the Vraxian delegation to chime in sympathetic dissonance. Light filtered through the translucent, kilometers-thick oceanic ceiling of the artificial world station, cast wavering, aqueous shadows across the faces of the 3,000 delegates. They were the masters of the known universe, the architects of the Galactic Concordat, an assemblage of biological and synthetic intelligence that had ruled the stars for 10 millennia without challenge. And today they were gathered to pass judgment on a curiosity, a nuisance. A species that had stumbled out of the gravity well of a yellow dwarf star, with all the grace of a drunkard crashing into a grand opera. The scale of the chamber was designed to diminish the individual. Tiers of polished celestium rose in concentric rings, towering kilometers high, filled with the shifting, chittering, telepathically whispering mass of the galaxy's elite. To stand in the center in the null-gravity well of judgment was to be an insect beneath a magnifying glass, scrutinized by gods. High Archon Xyler, a being of luminous plasma contained within an ornate containment suit of gold and glass, looked down from the apex throne. His thoughts, amplified by the station's neural grid, washed over the assembly like a cold tide. He felt the collective impatience of the council. They had important matters to attend to: stellar Dyson logistics, the manipulation of hyperlanes, the philosophical debate over the rights of synthetic souls. Instead, they were here, wasting cycles on the Terran question. Down in the well, standing on a floating disk of simple matte metal, was the human. He was small. That was the first thing Xyler noted, with a flicker of internal amusement that rippled through his plasma form. The bipedal creature was soft, comprised of fluid and calcium and decaying carbon. He wore no exoskeletal armor, no psionic amplification circlets, no shimmering robes of woven light that denoted status in the higher courts. He wore a suit of synthetic fiber, charcoal gray, with a white strip of fabric around his neck and a simple pin on his lapel. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his posture relaxed, his biological readout indicating a heart rate that was irritatingly steady. His name, according to the primitive data packet the humans had transmitted, was Ambassador Solon Vance. To the High Archon, he looked less like an ambassador and more like a pet that had been allowed to wander too far from its cage. "The tribunal is in session," Xyler projected, his voice bypassing the ears and resonating directly in the auditory centers of every being present. "We are gathered to address the insolence of the Terran Federation. You stand accused of obstructionism, illegal claiming of galactic heritage sites, and the refusal to submit to the benevolent guidance of the Concordat. You have blocked the hyperlanes to the abyss sector known as the Veil of Silence. You have fired warning shots upon Concordat survey vessels. You have claimed this territory as sovereign despite lacking the technological tier to exploit it." A murmur of agreement rippled through the stands. It sounded like the rushing of wind through dry leaves. The Vraxians clicked their mandibles in irritation. The gelatinous Authari shifted in their tanks. The sheer arrogance of this young species was baffling. The Veil of Silence was a dead zone, a region of space devoid of stars, suspected to contain ancient megastructures of the precursor architects. The Concordat sought to study them, to harvest the zero-point energy lattices that theoretical physics suggested must exist there. And these, monkeys, had parked their crude, kinetic weapon-armed fleets in the path of the Concordat's glorious science. "We do not seek to exploit it," the human said. His voice was not telepathic. It was audio-based, amplified by the simple microphones on his podium. It sounded flat, small, and terribly analog in the grand psionic hall. "And yet you occupy it," Xyler retorted, the golden machinery of his suit whirring as he leaned forward. "You place your ships in a blockade formation. You deny the High Fleet entry. You speak of sovereignty. Do you not understand, little creature, that sovereignty is derived from capability? The Concordat spans the spiral arm. We dismantle stars to fuel our incubators. We fold space like origami. And you burn dead plants to push metal tubes through the vacuum. You are children playing with a loaded weapon, claiming the nursery is yours to command." "It is not a nursery," Vance said. He did not look up at the apex throne. He looked straight ahead, his eyes dark and unreadable. "And we are not commanding it. We are closing the door." Laughter. It started with the Krell, a warrior race whose throats were lined with gravel, producing a barking, grinding sound. Then the fluid Athari joined in, bubbling and frothing in their tanks. The telepathic laughter of the ethereals swept through the room like a headache. It was a cacophony of mockery, a multi-species symphony of derision. The idea that this primitive biped, whose species had barely mastered fusion, was closing a door on the Concordat was the height of absurdity. It was as if a microbe had declared a quarantine on a surgeon. Xyler allowed the laughter to continue. It was political capital. It united the disparate factions of the council in a shared moment of superiority. It reminded them that for all their differences, they were the civilized, and the thing in the pit was the savage. He watched the human closely, expecting to see shame or fear or anger. He expected the mammal to shrink back, to tremble under the psychic weight of 1,000 superior intellects. Solon Vance did not tremble. He reached into his jacket pocket, a movement that caused 36 security drones to lock onto his vitals and withdrew a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles. He placed them on his nose. He adjusted his cuffs. He waited. The laughter died down, not because the humor was exhausted, but because the human stillness became unnerving. It was the stillness of a stone in a rushing river. It was an unnatural lack of reaction. "Are you finished?" Vance asked. His tone was polite, bordering on bored. "Your insolence," Xyler boomed, his plasma flaring red within his containment suit, "is noted, and it will be punished. The tribunal has already reached a verdict. The blockade will be dissolved. The Terran Federation will be sanctioned. You will surrender your navigational charts of the Veil immediately, and you will withdraw your forces to your home system. If you refuse, the Concordat Pacificity Fleet will remove you. This is not a negotiation. This is a decree." The silence that followed was heavy, pressurized. The entire assembly waited for the human to beg. They waited for the pleas for mercy, the diplomatic backpedaling, the desperate attempt to salvage some scrap of dignity. Vance tapped the console on his floating disk. A small holographic emitter whirred to life, projecting a grainy, two-dimensional image into the air above him. It was not a star map. It was not a weapon schematic. It was a graph. A simple, jagged line trending downward, then plateauing, then spiking vertically. "You laughed," Vance said softly. "You laughed when we told you the Veil was off limits. You laughed when we told you that our blockade was not an act of war, but an act of preservation. You see us as children. You see our ships as toys. You see our caution as cowardice." He looked up then. For the first time, he looked directly at the High Archon. The magnification screens around the arena zoomed in on the human's face. It was lined with age, pale and scarred, but the eyes were old, older than his biological years. They held a cold, terrifying clarity that sent a sudden, inexplicable shiver through Xyler's plasma core. "We are not the first to find the Veil," Vance continued, his voice gaining a strange resonance, a timbre that seemed to cut through the ambient hum of the station. "You call them the precursor architects. You worship their ruins. You scavenge their technology like rats gnawing on the bones of a god. You believe they transcended. You believe they left this galaxy for a higher plane of existence." "They did transcend," interrupted a Vraxian delegate, chittering furiously. "Heretic, the architects ascended to the ether." "No," Vance said. The word was a hammer blow. "They didn't ascend, they were eaten." The chamber went silent, not the silence of respect, but the silence of confusion. "We found their records," Vance said, gesturing to the jagged graph. "This is not a graph of economic growth. This is a graph of psionic entropy. The architects were like you, powerful, arrogant, loud. They filled the galaxy with their thoughts, their networks, their instantaneous communications. They screamed their existence into the void, believing they were the masters of reality. They didn't know that the void has ears." Xyler felt a spike of irritation. Superstition, ghost stories from a species that still believes in dirt gods. "Is it?" Vance pressed a button. The hologram changed. It showed a sector of space, the Veil of Silence. But the overlay showed something else. It showed a web of energy, faint, pulsating, stretching across light years like the strands of a spider web. "We call it the Hush Field. It is the only piece of technology we have that is truly ours. We didn't find it. We built it. For 300 years, since we first stumbled upon the edge of the Veil and saw what was sleeping there, we have dedicated our entire economy, our entire science, our entire culture to one thing: keeping it quiet." The human took a step forward, his hands gripping the podium. "The architects woke it up. Their psionic noise, their faster-than-light comms, their endless expansion. It disturbed the slumber of something that feeds on complexity. It feeds on order. It feeds on mind. The architects didn't leave. They were consumed. Their civilization was harvested in a matter of days. The only reason life survived in this galaxy at all is because they died fast enough for the entity to go back to sleep. Preposterous, Xyler scoffed, though he felt a twinge of unease in his neural link. The sensors were picking up a transmission from the human's podium. It wasn't a weapon. It was a data dump. Petabytes of historical archives, sensor logs, archaeological necropsies of dead worlds within the veil. We built the dampeners, Vance went on, his voice relentless. Our ships in the blockade aren't warships. They are heat sinks for consciousness. They absorb the psionic noise of the galaxy and ground it. We have been acting as a noise-canceling headphone for the entire sector, hiding you from it. We endure the silence. We endure the isolation. We endure your mockery. Because we looked at the bones of the architects and we saw teeth marks. The High Archon tried to laugh again to reassert control, but the sound died in his throat. The data was scrolling across his internal HUD. It was thorough, terrifyingly thorough. Images of worlds stripped not of atmosphere, but of thought. Cities standing perfectly intact, but devoid of any biological material more complex than a fern. You demand we leave, Vance said. You demand we take our toys and go home. You demand access to the veil so you can run your scanners and shout your presence into the dark. He paused, looking around the vast chamber. He looked at the Crawl, the Athari, the Vraxians. He looked at them with a mixture of pity and contempt that was more stinging than any insult. We tried to warn you. We sent diplomatic envoys. You turned them away. We sent encrypted warnings. You deleted them as spam. We set up a blockade to physically stop you from committing suicide. You called it an act of aggression. Vance slowly took off his glasses and folded them. He placed them in his pocket. The Terran Federation is logical, High Archon. We are pragmatic. We cannot fight the Concordat. Your fleets outnumber us 1,000 to 1. Your weapons can boil our oceans. If we stay and fight to maintain the hush field, we will die and the field will fail anyway. If we leave, the field fails and you wake the sleeper. The human straightened his tie. So we accept your judgment. A collective gasp went through the hall. We accept the tribunal's decree, Vance said, his voice crystal clear. You want the veil, it's yours. You want us to withdraw, we are withdrawing. The order was sent the moment you banged that gavel. Our ships are already spooling their drives. The dampeners are powering down. The hush field is dissolving as we speak. Wait, Xyler said. The unease was now panic. He checked the long-range sensors. Reports were flooding in from the frontier outposts. The Terran ships, those brick-like, silent vessels that had stood sentinel for decades, were turning. They were breaking formation. They were jumping away. You wanted the silence to end, Vance said, stepping off the podium. You wanted to make noise. Go ahead, scream, but do not blame us when something answers. Arrest him, Xyler shrieked, the golden plates of his suit grinding. Seize the human. This is a trick, a bluff. Security drones swooped down, energy nets crackling. Vance didn't resist. He stood calmly, watching the panic begin to ripple through the High Synod. But before the drones could touch him, the station's main lights flickered. It was a subtle thing at first, a dip in the power grid, then a sound. Not a sound from the air, a sound in the mind. It started as a scratch, a mental itch behind the eyes of 3,000 telepathic species, a static hiss that built with impossible speed into a roar. The Athari representatives began to thrash in their tanks, their water boiling from the heat of their own panic synapses. The Vraxians fell to their knees, clutching their heads, their crystalline shells cracking from the resonant frequency of a scream that wasn't there. On the massive holographic display above the apex throne, the map of the galaxy turned red. The veil of silence was no longer silent. Sensors screamed as a wave of psionic energy, darker than the void between stars, erupted from the sector the humans had just abandoned. It wasn't a fleet. It wasn't an army. It was a presence, a hunger. It moved faster than light, riding the very hyperlanes the Concordat had built, surging through the neural networks they prided themselves on. What have you done? Xyler whispered, his plasma form shrinking, dimming in terror. He could feel it. A cold, oily tendril of thought brushing against the perimeter of his mind. It felt like being observed by a predator the size of a nebula. Vance stood amidst the chaos, the only calm point in a sea of madness. The security drones had malfunctioned, their logic cores fried by the initial wavefront of the entity's awakening. He looked up at the apex throne, his expression somber. We held the wall, Vance said, his voice barely audible over the screaming of the delegates. For 3 centuries we held the wall. We bled in the dark so you could play in the light. We didn't ask for thanks. We only asked for distance. But you had to know. You had to have everything. The station shook. Real space was beginning to warp around the High Synod. The entity had found the loudest source of thought in the galaxy. It had found the dinner bell. "Ambassador," Xyler screamed, the dignity of the High Archon gone, replaced by the primal fear of a prey animal. "Call them back, reactivate the field, we will grant you anything. Systems, resources, we will make you High Lords of the Concordat. Just make it stop." Vance shook his head slowly. "We cannot. The dampeners take weeks to charge, the wake is already turbulent, the water has been disturbed, High Archon, the shark is awake." "Then save us," Xyler pleaded. "Your ships, you said they were heat sinks, use them." "They are leaving," Vance said. "We are retreating to the Sol exclusion zone. We are severing our connection to the galactic net. We are going dark. We are going to hide in the mud and wait for the storm to pass." "You would leave us to die?" The accusation was a wail of despair. "You ordered us to leave," Vance reminded him. The cruelty of the logic was absolute. "We are a lawful species. We are obeying the tribunal." The psychic pressure in the room intensified. Delegates were collapsing, their minds being overwritten by the sheer alien complexity of the entity. It was not a war, it was an absorption. The Concordat, with all its high-minded interconnectivity and psionic reliance, was a banquet. Humanity, with its fractured minds, its reliance on crude verbal speech, its lack of a hive mind, was indigestible, small, hard, unappetizing. Vance tapped a button on his wrist. A shimmering teleportation field enveloped him, crude technology, jarring and loud but functional. "We will remember you," Vance said, his form beginning to dissolve into light. "We will archive your history, we will learn from your mistakes, and perhaps in 10,000 years, when the entity has fed and returned to sleep, we will come back out, we will bury your bones." "No," Xyler reached out, a tendril of plasma striking the empty space where the human had stood. "No." But the human was gone. The High Synod dissolved into chaos. The lights died, replaced by the red emergency strobes that pulsed like a dying heart. The laughter that had filled the chamber only minutes ago seemed like a memory from a different universe. There was no laughter now. There was only the sound of the galaxy's greatest civilization screaming in unison, and the terrible, suffocating silence of the void rushing in to silence them. From the observation deck of the UES Silentium, Solon Vance watched the telemetry. He watched the lights of the Concordat capital flicker and die one by one as the psionic storm consumed them. He did not smile. He felt no vindication. He felt only the heavy, crushing weight of survival. "Status?" he asked the bridge crew. "Fleet is away, Ambassador," the captain replied, his voice grim. "Hyperdrive spinning up. We are severing all comms. Protocol Dark Forest is in effect. We're going home." "Do it," Vance whispered. He looked back one last time at the dying empire, at the shimmering, beautiful, arrogant lights being snuffed out by the ancient dark. "Don't blame us," he murmured to the vacuum. "We told you, we warned you." The stars stretched out before them, cold and indifferent. The humans turned their backs on the fire and vanished into the quiet, safe obscurity of the deep dark. The silence of the void is not empty. It is heavy. It is the weight of water above a submarine, the pressure of earth above a coffin. For the survivors of the Terran Federation, silence was not a lack of sound, it was a shield. In the weeks that followed the fall of the Concordat, the galaxy changed. It did not explode. There were no grand battles, no heroic last stands of starfighters against a cosmic horror. The entity did not fight, it merely permeated. It was a phenomenon of information entropy. It moved through the hypernet, through the psionic links of the high races. To be connected was to be consumed. To think loudly was to invite erasure. The Terran fleet, running dark, navigated the shoals of the outer rim. They used archaic star charts, paper maps, and visual navigation. They turned off their AIs. They communicated via laser line and handwritten notes. They became a fleet of ghosts. Solon Vance sat in his quarters aboard the Silentium, writing in a physical journal with a graphite pencil. The scratching sound was the only noise in the room. "Day 42 of the long quiet," he wrote. "Long-range passive optical sensors confirm the dimming of the core worlds. The Ethel Guardian hegemony is dark. The Authari cloud is silent. We have detected no subspace transmissions for 10 days. The screaming has stopped." He paused, the lead hovering over the paper. He thought of Xyler. He thought of the laughter. It was a tragedy of biology, he mused. The Concordat had evolved to be open, to share thoughts, to merge consciousness. It was the pinnacle of evolution in a safe universe. But the universe was not safe. The universe was a dark forest full of predators, and the Concordat had built a bonfire and started singing. There was a knock at his door, a gentle, rhythmic rapping. "Enter," Vance said. Captain Holloway stepped in. She looked tired. Her uniform was unpressed, a violation of regulations that no longer mattered. "Ambassador, we've picked up a signal." Vance stiffened. "Source?" "Short range, very short. It's drifting, sir. A derelict. Ethel Guardian design. It's a courier yacht, no power. Just a distress beacon running on emergency chemical batteries." "Is it infected?" Vance asked, the term coming naturally now. The entity was a plague of the mind. "We don't think so. It's completely analog. The beacon is a repeating radio wave. Morse code, sir, or their equivalent." "What does it say?" Holloway swallowed. "It says, 'You were right, help us.'" Vance closed his journal. He stood up and walked to the viewport. The stars were hard points of light, unblinking eyes. "We can't," he said softly. "Sir, it's a single ship," Holloway argued, though her voice lacked conviction. "If there are survivors, if they learned, if they severed their link." "If we open the door even a crack, the wind gets in," Vance said. "You know the protocol, absolute quarantine. If we engage, we emit. If we emit, it finds us." "So we just leave them." "We left 3 trillion of them, Captain. One more ship changes nothing." But Vance felt the sickness in his gut. The cold logic that had saved humanity was also damning it. They were surviving, yes. But were they still human? Or had they become something else? Cold, unfeeling creatures of the dark, just like the monsters they were hiding from. "Bring it up on the visual scope," Vance ordered. "Don't hail, don't scan, just let me see it." They went to the bridge. The main screen, currently a slab of black glass, was manually deactivated. Instead, they used the optical telescope array, projecting the image onto a physical white screen at the front of the room. The alien ship was a wreck. Its golden solar sails were torn, hanging like dead leaves. The hull was scorched. But there, in the observation blister, Vance could see movement. Faint, desperate movement. "Magnify," he said. The lenses shifted. The image blurred, then sharpened. Inside the blister, a figure was pressing a piece of material against the glass. It wasn't a digital display. It was a sign, written in crude, hand-painted glyphs. The translation software was offline, but Vance knew the Ethel Guardian script. "We are silent now." Vance stared at the words. "They severed themselves," Holloway whispered. "They must have lobotomized their telepathic centers, physically." It was a horrific thought. For an Ethel Guardian, losing the telepathic link was like a human gouging out their eyes and cutting off their tongue. It was a mutilation of the soul, but it was also proof. They had adapted. They had learned the lesson of the dark. "Sir," Holloway asked. The bridge crew looked at him. They were terrified, but they were also desperate for a shred of hope. If they could save one, maybe the guilt of the 3 trillion would weigh less. Vance looked at the sign. "We are silent now." He thought of the tribunal, he thought of the arrogance, but he also thought of the graph, the great filter. The test of a civilization was not its technology, but its adaptability. The Concordat had failed the test of the entity, but this ship had passed. "Prepare a boarding party," Vance said. The words hung in the air, dangerous and electric. "Mechanical suits only, no neural interfaces, analog weapons. We go over in hard vacuum gear if anyone shows signs of psionic infection. You vent the airlock, understood?" "Yes, sir," Holloway breathed. "And Captain," Vance added, "keep the main drive spooled. If that ship so much as twitches on the spectral bands, we burn hard and we leave them behind." "Aye, sir." The boarding was a slow, agonizing process. Vance insisted on leading the team. He wore a bulky, hydraulic-powered EVA suit that smelled of recycled rubber and machine grease. He clumped through the airlock of the alien yacht, his magnetic boots clanging against the golden deck plates. The interior of the ship was a tomb. The beautiful, organic lighting of the Ethel Guardians was dead. The air was stale, freezing. Floating in the zero-gravity corridors were the bodies of Authari and Vraxians, their heads burst open, the result of the initial psionic scream. They had not been quick enough. But as they reached the bridge, they found them. 12 survivors, a mix of species, high caste, low caste. They were huddled together in the center of the room, wrapped in thermal blankets. One of them stood up as Vance entered. It was an Ethel Guardian, but it was ruined. The beautiful, glowing antennae that crowned its head had been sheared off, burned away with plasma torches. The wounds were cauterized and ugly. The creature looked diminished, broken, a shadow of the luminous beings in the Synod. It was Xyler. The former High Archon looked at the human in the clunky, primitive suit. There was no recognition of status in his eyes, no arrogance. There was only the hollow, haunted look of a man who has seen the face of God and found it hungry. Xyler raised a hand. He did not speak telepathically. He could not. He made a series of gestures, the universal sign for surrender. Then he pointed to his throat and then to the dead console. He picked up a stylus and wrote on a slate, holding it up for Vance to see. "The noise is gone. Is it safe to breathe?" Vance looked at the fallen leader. The irony was cosmic. The creature that had laughed at humanity for being deaf and blind to the greater universe had now maimed itself to become just like them. Vance activated his external speaker. "It is not safe," he said, his voice booming in the silent ship. "It will never be safe again, but we are alive." Xyler nodded slowly. A tear, thick and silvery, rolled down his face. "We can take you," Vance said. "But you live by our rules now. No networks, no mind links, no empire. We are the rats in the walls now, Xyler. We survive by being small." The former Archon bowed. It was a clumsy, physical movement, lacking all the grace of his former self, but it possessed a dignity that the Synod had never held. "Teach us," Xyler wrote. Vance signaled his team. "Get them to the airlock. Decon Protocols Alpha 1. Strip them of any tech more advanced than a flashlight. Welcome to the Stone Age." As they transferred the survivors, Vance looked back at the void. The galaxy was dark. The great civilizations were gone, their monuments turned to tombstones. The entity was out there, prowling the ruins, sniffing for the scent of a thought. But in the darkness, a tiny convoy of ships, silent and cold, moved away from the graveyard. They were not conquerors. They were not gods. They were humans, and they were the only thing left. The tribunal had laughed. The human had spoken. And now, in the silence that followed the end of the world, the human was the only one left to listen. "Course set for the Orion Spur," Holloway reported as Vance returned to the bridge. "We're going deep into the nebula. Too much magnetic interference for the entity to track us there." "Good," Vance said. He sat in his command chair, the leather creaking. "Let's disappear." He looked at the recovered slate, at Xyler's shaky handwriting. "Teach us." Vance picked up his pencil and opened his journal to a fresh page. "Day 43, he wrote. "We are no longer alone. We have picked up strays. The galaxy is dead, but the seeds remain. We will nurture them. We will teach them how to build walls. We will teach them how to be quiet. And maybe one day we will teach them how to kill the thing that eats gods." He closed the book. "Engage," he said. The engines flared, a brief, calculated burst of chemical fire, and the silentium slipped into the shadows, carrying the last hope of a humbled galaxy into the long, dark night. The warning had been delivered, the price had been paid. Now the work began.